In this video, we'll look at the rise of Abraham Lincoln, his background, and his early rise politically up until the Lincoln-Douglas debates in 1858. Lincoln was the son of Thomas Lincoln, who you can see on the left here, who worked as a farmer and a carpenter. And his mother was Nancy Hanks Lincoln. There's no photograph of her, but I found a photograph of her early childhood home. Lincoln was born in Kentucky in 1809, which was then still a relative frontier. He was born in a one-room log cabin, and you can see a picture of a replica above here, which is at the Lincoln National Birthplace Museum. And Lincoln had two siblings, a sister Sarah and a brother Thomas, although Thomas died in infancy. The family moved several times, including to Indiana and finally to Illinois. Lincoln's mother died when Lincoln was 10 of milk fever, they called it, and his father quickly remarried Sarah Bush Johnston. And you can see a picture of her on the right here in her later years. Anyway, Sarah became a surrogate mother to Lincoln and encouraged his education and morals. Lincoln turned out to be an avid reader and really was largely self-educated. Lincoln's relationship with his father was strange, in part by Lincoln's preoccupation with reading and dislike for manual labor. As he neared adulthood, Lincoln worked on a flatbed boat down the Mississippi River to New Orleans and later worked as a clerk. That trip down to New Orleans was really the first time he saw a lot of substantial slavery. He had a troubled love life. He was temporarily engaged to one woman that the marriage sort of the engagement didn't work out. And, you know, he was subject to periods of what they call melancholy. We would call it depression today. In the 1840s, he met and married Mary Todd Lincoln, and you can see her on the right. She was the daughter of a pretty prominent man in Springfield, Illinois. And the Mary Todd and Abraham Lincoln had four children: Robert, Eddie, Willie, and Tad. And of those, really only Robert lived to full adulthood. You can see a picture of Lincoln with his son Tad in 1864 there on the left, and Tad died when he was 18. Lincoln served as a captain in the Black Hawk War, but saw no action, later joking about it self-effacingly. He served 4 terms in the Illinois House of Representatives, and there he was a Henry Clay Whig with political ambitions, even if this Whig Party was going to soon dissolve. On the right here, you can see a discharge that Captain Lincoln had written for one of his soldiers, and on the left is a statue of him as a captain in the Illinois militia. Having read the law, that meant that he hung around a law practice and read law books. Lincoln was able to pass the state licensing exam, and he turned to the practice of law full time. By this point, he'd settled in Springfield, and that was his home until he became president, and so it's now considered Lincoln's hometown. On the left, you can see the picture of Lincoln's house. And I think, I'm not positive, that's a picture of Lincoln you can look closely, you can see a picture of Lincoln and his son. But anyway, on the right, that is the picture of the Lincoln's house in Springfield today. Lincoln's law practice was successful, and since many courts rotated from town to town, he, quote, rode the circuit, as they say. In times, he became a really great orator, a man able to spin a yarn. Lincoln's family had anti-slavery sentiments, but Lincoln was no abolitionist. Lincoln believed that African Americans were part of the human family. They had humanity and were entitled to rights. But he also believed that they were not equal to whites. He was a man of his time. He opposed, for example, giving Illinois African Americans the right to vote or the right to sit on juries, but didn't exhibit, I should say, the overt racism and the anger of others. He was first and foremost concerned with preserving the Union, and a lot of his political career as time went on was really focused on just keeping that together. Uh, he saw the solution as keeping slavery from spreading westward, but not interfering with where it existed. So that's a platform of the Free Soil Party and, of course, the Republican Party. He hoped that in the future it would die out on its own. I should also add that at one time Lincoln supported the American Colonization Society, moving African Americans back to Africa. Uh, he was known as a smart guy, an attorney with an old homespun folksy style that really couldn't hide his sharp intellect. In the year 1847-1848, Lincoln served one unremarkable term in the United States House of Representatives, a congressman, and he left because he'd promised to serve only one term. Now, however, Lincoln had better name recognition and growing prominence as a free soiler and ardent unionist. He set his eyes on the Senate in 1858, and among his many speeches as he began to campaign for that office was his famous "A house divided against itself cannot stand" speech. And you can see a quote from it here on the left. "A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall, but I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all the other." Of course, he's hoping for the abolition of slavery to sort of the slavery would sort of burn out. So when Lincoln came to Lincoln Douglas debates, he was already prominent, but getting Douglas to issue the Freeport Doctrine mentioned in a previous video, Lincoln was clearly emerging as one of the front runners for the Republican nomination in 1860. This concludes the short little video on the rise of Abraham Lincoln politically from his birth into the 1858 Senate election. The rest of course, Lincoln's career will be in subsequent videos.